It seems like everywhere you turn these days, the ground is shaking,
Yeah.
Japan, Alaska, California, even the south coast of British Columbia and Washington have all seen some pretty serious tremors lately. And
Yeah.
it's enough to make you wonder,
Right.
are we really prepared for the big one?
Well, these recent events are certainly a stark reminder that earthquakes can happen anywhere, anytime. And as we're seeing with the ongoing aftershocks in Turkey, the danger doesn't simply disappear once the initial shaking stops.
Exactly. And it's got me thinking, if an earthquake hit right now, would I know what to do beyond maybe standing in a doorway, which I've heard is actually not the best advice?
Yeah.
That's why we're doing this deep dive today.
Okay.
We're going to take a stack of the latest research and real-world stories, including Tina Jin's Emergency Survival Handbook, and extract the need-to-know info to help you feel more confident and prepared.
That's right. We'll separate fact from fiction, uncover some surprising insights, and ultimately equip you with a plan that goes beyond just duck and cover.
So speaking of recent events, let's start with a quick rundown of what's been happening globally. Japan had a 7.5 magnitude earthquake causing significant damage. California experienced a 4.9 shaker that rattled residents awake at 2 a.m. And Alaska's quake even sparked tsunami warnings.
What's striking about these events is that they challenge the idea that some regions are simply more prepared than others.
Right.
Even Japan, known for its advanced earthquake engineering, experienced substantial impacts. It underscores the importance of individual preparedness regardless of where you live.
That's a good point. It's easy to think, oh, that happens over there, not here. But these events are a wake-up call that we all need to be ready. And speaking of being ready, our sources emphasize a technique called drop, cover, and hold on as the most effective way to protect yourself during an earthquake. But I have to admit, even that phrase makes me feel a bit clueless.
It sounds simple, but there are important nuances to it. It means dropping to the ground, taking cover under a sturdy desk or table, not a doorway, as that myth has been debunked, and holding on tight until the shaking stops. The handbook actually uses the analogy of a turtle retreating into its shell. Protect your vital organs by making yourself as small and secure as possible.
That makes it much clearer, the turtle analogy, but wouldn't a doorway at least offer some protection?
Wow.
Why does the handbook specifically advise against it?
In modern homes, doorways aren't necessarily stronger than other parts of the structure.
Okay.
They might have seemed sturdier in older buildings, but that advice is outdated. The real danger is being hit by falling objects or debris. Taking cover under sturdy furniture gives you a much better chance of avoiding injury.
That makes sense. So forget the doorway myth. We're going for full turtle mode under a table.
Yeah.
Now, what about after the shaking stops?
No.
Is it safe to just get up and go about your business?
Not so fast.
Yeah.
One of the most crucial things our sources emphasize is the danger of aftershocks. These can occur minutes, hours, or even days after the initial earthquake, and sometimes they can be even stronger than the main event.
That's terrifying. So we need to stay vigilant even after things seem to have calmed down.
Exactly. And this is where having a well-stocked emergency kit becomes essential. Think of it as your lifeline for those first few critical hours or even days after an earthquake.
Okay, time to confess, my emergency kit is basically just a half-eaten bag of trail mix and a flashlight with dead batteries. What should a real emergency kit include?
It's more than just snacks and a light source.
Yeah.
Although those are important. We're talking about being self-sufficient for at least 72 hours. Think food, water, a first aid kit, a whistle to signal for help if you're trapped, and even a wrench or pliers to turn off utilities if necessary.
A wrench.
Yeah.
That's not something I would have thought of.
It's surprising what can become essential in an emergency, for example. The handbook mentions using a whistle to signal for help if you're trapped, something many people wouldn't think of. And having basic tools could be crucial if you need to shut off gas or water to prevent further damage.
Okay, adding whistle and wrench to my shopping list right now, it's starting to feel less like prepping for the apocalypse and more like being a responsible adult.
That's a
Yeah.
great way to look at it.
It-
It's not about panicking. It's about being prepared. And speaking of preparation, one area that often gets overlooked is communication. What happens if cell service is down? How do you connect with loved ones?
That's a good point. I rely on my phone for everything. What are some alternative ways to communicate during an emergency?
Walkie-talkies are a reliable option since they don't rely on cell towers. It's also a good idea to designate an out-of-town contact who everyone can check in with if they're separated. This acts as a central point of communication.
That's smart. So we've got our emergency kit, our communication plan. It's starting to feel like we're building a real strategy here, not just hoping for the best.
Exactly. And speaking of strategy, let's talk about what to do before an earthquake even hits. There are things you can do to earthquake-proof your home and minimize potential damage or hazards. It's a bit like putting on a detective hat and going through your house room by room. One of the first things to look at are heavy objects, bookcases, mirrors, artwork, anything that could topple over and become a projectile during shaking.
Oh, yeah, I have this massive antique mirror over my fireplace that I've always been a little nervous about. What's the best way to secure something like that?
The handbook recommends using sturdy straps or brackets to anchor those items to the wall. Think of it as giving them an extra layer of support so they ride out the shaking in place.
I'm picturing myself right now at the hardware store, surrounded by straps and brackets, channeling my inner DIY superhero.
It can be empowering to take those steps. Another important area to check is your water heater. Make sure it's properly strapped to the wall studs as well. A ruptured water heater can cause significant damage and also leave you without hot water during the time when you'll likely need it most.
Good point. Hot showers are probably pretty high on the list of post-earthquake comforts. Speaking of comfort, I think we often focus on the physical aspects of preparedness, but what about the mental and emotional side of things? Earthquakes can be incredibly traumatic experiences.
That's a crucial aspect that often gets overlooked. It's not just about surviving the initial shaking, it's about coping with the aftermath and the potential for long-term stress and anxiety.
So how do we prepare ourselves mentally and emotionally for something that can feel so unpredictable and overwhelming?
One of the most powerful things we can do is simply talk about it. Don't bottle up your fears and anxieties. Share them with loved ones, friends, or a therapist. Talking helps normalize those feelings and makes them less scary.
I think we often try to shield ourselves or our children from those difficult conversations, but you're saying it's actually healthier to acknowledge them.
Absolutely. When we avoid talking about tough topics, they become bigger and scarier in our minds. Open communication creates a sense of shared understanding and support. It's also important to have coping mechanisms in place, things like deep breathing exercises, meditation, or spending time in nature activities that help you manage stress and anxiety.
It's like building a mental and emotional first aid kit alongside our physical one.
Exactly. And just like we practice drop, cover, and hold on, for physical safety, we can practice those mental and emotional tools to build resilience and a sense of calm.
Okay, that's a great analogy. Now, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, the importance of community preparedness. Why is it so crucial to think beyond our individual households when it comes to earthquakes?
Imagine a scenario where roads are blocked, communication is down, and first responders are overwhelmed. Your neighbors become your lifeline.
That's a stark reminder that we can't always rely on immediate outside help.
Exactly. Building strong community connections before an earthquake hits is one of the most powerful things we can do.
So it's about creating a network of support that extends beyond our immediate families.
Exactly. It's about knowing your neighbors, checking in on each other, and potentially even working together to create a community emergency response plan.
So what are some practical steps we can take to foster that sense of community preparedness? It feels a bit abstract.
It starts with simple things like attending neighborhood meetings, organizing block parties, or even just saying hello to the people you see on your street every day. Building those relationships creates a foundation of trust and support.
That sounds more enjoyable than I expected. I was picturing mandatory emergency drills and stockpiling supplies.
While drills and supplies are important, community preparedness is about fostering a culture of shared responsibility and connection. When people feel connected, they're more likely to help each other out in times of need.
It's like the old saying, it takes a village. But in this case, it's preparing the village for a potential earthquake.
Precisely. And you can be as simple as knowing who in your neighborhood might need extra assistance, like elderly residents or families with young children. That way you can check on them after an earthquake and offer support.
I hadn't thought of it that way. It's about looking out for each other, not just ourselves.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that our individual well-being is intertwined with the well-being of our community as a whole.
This whole conversation is making me think about preparedness in a completely different way. It's not just about having a go bag and knowing where to duck and cover. It's about building a foundation of resilience, resourcefulness, and community support.
That's a great way to put it. It's a shift in mindset from feeling helpless to feeling empowered. And that brings us back to the resource we've been mentioning throughout this deep dive. Tina Jin's Ready for Anything, a free emergency survival handbook.
Oh yes, this book has been coming up a lot. What makes it so special?
It's not just another generic survival guide. Tina again goes deep into specific scenarios, providing practical advice for situations most people don't even think about, like what to do if you're driving during an earthquake.
Wait, hold on. What do you do if you're driving when an earthquake hits? That's terrifying.
It's definitely a scenario that requires quick thinking. The handbook advises pulling over to the side of the road, away from anything that could fall, like power lines or trees, and then stay in your car. It actually acts as a protective cage.
Okay, that's good to know. I was picturing myself jumping out of the car and running for cover, which sounds way more dangerous now that I think about it.
Right. The handbook also covers things like how to safely shut off utilities if you suspect a leak, how to care for pets during an emergency, and even how to purify water if your supply is compromised.
It sounds incredibly comprehensive.
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to download it. I have to admit I was a bit skeptical about a free survival handbook, but now I'm intrigued.
That's the beauty of it. It's accessible to everyone, and it's packed with valuable information. And Tina Ginn doesn't just stop at earthquake preparedness. She covers a wide range of emergency situations, making it a truly valuable resource for anyone who wants to feel more prepared for the unexpected.
This is definitely going on my to-do list. Download the handbook, check my smoke detectors, strap down my water heater. But before we get too lost in our preparedness checklist, I think it's important to step back and acknowledge something.
What's that?
All this talk about earthquakes can be pretty heavy. It's easy to get caught up in the what-ifs and start feeling anxious.
Yeah, it's a valid point. It's important to strike a balance between being prepared and not letting fear take over our lives.
Exactly. So how do we walk that line? How do we stay informed and prepared without spiraling into a constant state of worry? It's a bit of a tightrope walk, isn't it? We want to be prepared, but we don't want to live in a constant state of anxiety.
Exactly.
Right.
I think the key is to focus on what we can control.
Okay.
We can control how prepared we are. We can control how we respond to challenging situations, and we can control how we support each other.
That makes sense. It's about shifting our mindset from fear to empowerment. But let's be honest, sometimes it's hard not to feel overwhelmed by the sheer scale of potential disasters, especially when you start digging into the research.
I agree. It's easy to get caught in a spiral of what ifs. But that's where having a plan, even a simple one, can be so helpful.
Mhm.
It gives you a sense of agency and control.
Yeah.
Instead of feeling paralyzed by fear, you have concrete steps you can take.
That reminds me of something Tina Ginn talks about in her handbook. She says that one of the biggest obstacles to preparedness is feeling like it's all too much, like you need to build a bunker and stockpile a year's worth of food.
She's absolutely right. Preparedness doesn't have to be extreme. It's about taking small, manageable steps that gradually build up your resilience.
Yeah.
It could be as simple as securing a bookshelf to the wall this weekend or having a conversation with your family about an evacuation plan.
It's about progress, not perfection.
Exactly. And it's about celebrating those small wins. Each step you take, no matter how small, is a step towards greater peace of mind and a sense of control over your own safety and well-being.
That's a great reminder. It's easy to get lost in the big picture and forget to acknowledge the small victories along the way. And speaking of victories, I think we've achieved something pretty remarkable in this deep dive.
I agree. What stood out to you?
Well, we've taken a potentially scary and overwhelming topic, earthquake preparedness, and broken it down into manageable steps, actionable advice, and even some humor along the way. Hopefully, our listeners are feeling more informed and empowered, not intimidated or anxious.
That was definitely the goal. And one of the things I love about these deep dives is that we don't just present information, we encourage critical thinking and discussion.
Exactly like questioning the doorway myth or exploring the emotional side of preparedness.
Right.
It's about engaging with the material and figuring out what works best for each individual and community.
And that's where resources like Tina Ginn's handbook come in. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution, but a starting point for building your own personalized plan.
Right, it's a toolbox, not a prescription.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
And the best part is it's constantly evolving. As we learn more about earthquakes and disaster preparedness, we can add new tools to our toolbox.
That's the beauty of knowledge. It's always growing and expanding. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one key takeaway you want our listeners to remember?
Preparedness is not about predicting the future or eliminating all risk. It's about acknowledging that life is unpredictable and equipping ourselves with the knowledge, skills, and support systems to navigate those uncertainties with confidence and resilience.
Beautifully said. And if there's one resource that embodies that spirit of empowered preparedness, it's Tina Ginn's Ready for Anything. But seriously, folks, download it. It's free, it's comprehensive, and it could literally save your life.
I couldn't agree more. It's a gift to yourself and your loved ones.
So on that note, we're going to sign off for today, but we encourage you to keep learning, keep preparing, and keep those conversations going. Remember, you're not alone in this journey. We're all in this together.
Stay curious, stay connected, and stay safe.